So I took down my last video about Z-Dog because, well, it's really a matter of time before he gets taken down because it's going to be deemed misinformation or some other bullshit of the sort. But I will upload it to Odyssey as well as that 5G video that got taken down prematurely. So if you're interested in that, go check out my Odyssey channel. As soon as I figure out how to upload videos to that from my phone, they'll be up there. But in this video, real quick, I just wanted to talk about this quote, "Everyone is biased," unquote fallacy, which obviously, if you've seen it, follows from the Z-Dog video. It's essentially this idea that he was pushing, which ultimately delegitimized himself, right? And everything that he was saying, because ultimately he's just biased. But it was weird because while his intellectual opponents, who, in my opinion, aren't any closer to the truth themselves, really, but because his intellectual opponents were biased, they were incorrect, and despite the fact that Z-Dog admitted himself to he himself being biased as well, well, he was still somehow correct, right? So it just didn't make any sense, right? To say that everybody is biased, it's a fallacy because it essentially rejects truth. Now, I don't know if this is a formal fallacy or if it goes by this name. It's a little bit like the 2-K fallacy, where, you know, if I accuse you of doing something wrong, you could retort by saying, well, you did the same thing, right? Well, that's a fallacy because that's still, even if you are correct, that still doesn't mean that you are correct, right? Even if you are correct insofar as me being wrong to whatever this thing that I am, insofar as this thing that I'm accusing you of doing, just because I also may or may not have done that doesn't mean that you didn't do it, right? So it's like, well, you did it too, so what? So that means that if I did it too, that doesn't mean that you are correct, right, in doing so. Anyway, so I guess it's kind of like that, but not exactly. And I don't know that if that it's called that. Maybe it has a different name. But here's the fun thing about fallacies. You don't have to necessarily know what they are known as officially, formally. You can discover them on your own, right? Now, I wouldn't go as far as saying that you can make them up, which is what Z-Dog was doing. He made up, essentially, fallacy of false authority, right? When the fallacy is, well, the fallacy that he was pushing was argument from false authority, whereas the fallacy is simply argument from authority. Anyway, I explained that in that video. He just made it up because, well, that fallacy doesn't exist. Him saying that was a fallacy, right? Was an argument from authority along with, mixed together with argument from popularity. Anyway, so I wouldn't go as far as to say that you could make up your own fallacies, create them out of thin air, right? But you could discover them if it's logically sound, right? If it makes sense, if it's true, then it doesn't matter what name you give to it, so long as you explain it and it makes sense, right? So to say we're gonna call it, quote, "Everybody is biased," a fallacy, unquote. Now, is it untrue that everybody will at some point perhaps be biased about something? That's probably true, right? But that's not what people mean when they say that, right? It's usually when people say this, which is why I liken it to cocaine fallacy, because it is used as such sometimes. When someone gets accused of being biased, they say, well, everybody's biased, or you are biased too, right? Because everybody's biased. I guess those would be two fallacies in one once again. But right, when people say everybody's biased, what they're saying is that no one is ever correct, right? Because while you can say that bias is simply a kind of a preference, kind of a preference. Well, yeah, when it comes to subjective things like what flavor of ice cream you like, or blonde or brunette, right? Yeah, that's a certain kind of a preference that may not be unreasoned, or may not be reasoned, as this says, right? It is unreasoned. You just, if someone asks you, well, why? You don't really have a reason. Now, maybe with ice cream you could say because it tastes better. Well, I don't know, maybe blondes taste better than brunettes too. But generally, a lot of the times, these subjective preferences, there's really no rhyme or reason to them, or you don't really have to have a justification. You just prefer this or that. Yeah, I suppose that's kind of a bias, sure. But when it comes to debating what is true, talking about objective reality, to say that someone is biased, right? That is to say that they don't have an argument. They just have this preconceived notion, and they're dogmatic about it no matter what, right? They don't have a justification for them believing that that thing is true about our objective reality, right? And in the case of Z-Dog versus McCullough, it was, broadly speaking, therapeutics versus the vaccine, right? So in that context, to say everybody is biased is to say that no one has a logical, reasoned argument that stands for the truth, is true, right? Represents the truth, gets us to truth, is true, right? It is to say that. So it is to reject truth, while at the same time saying that that in and of itself is true, right? Everybody is biased is true. But to say that everybody is biased is to say that truth doesn't exist. Or that we, at the very least, we're incapable of recognizing truth, while at the same time, you just recognize truth, right? You just made a truth statement. You claim to know the truth while saying that no one can reasonably come to know truth. It doesn't make any sense, right? It's self-refuting. It's a fallacy, right? Now, if you think that I'm or somebody else in any particular conversation about the objective truth of this or that matter, well, then you should be able to present that. You should be able to argue that, right? You should be able to point out their bias. But, it's not really necessary to do that when you can just show how their arguments are false, right? You don't have to make it personal, accuse them of, being intentionally deceitful or some such thing. Just show how their arguments are wrong and move the fuck on, right? So this whole idea, please don't ever say that when talking about objective reality, right? Well, everybody's biased, because that doesn't make any sense. It's to reject the existence of objective truth, or which is, redundant to say that, I guess. It's to reject truth while at the same time saying that that statement in and of itself is true, right? It doesn't make any sense. Now, if you want to talk about the flavor of ice cream, or blondes and brunettes, really not interesting. It's not at all meaningful to me, and I don't give a fuck. It's just your preference. Okay, everybody's biased. Everybody has a preference, right? So that's why when you look at the definition of the word bias, it says especially one. It's a tendency, trend, inclination, feeling, opinion, belief, especially one that is preconceived or unreasoned. Because other than that, you could just say, well, I'm just inclined to like strawberry ice cream or brunettes, right? I think that's all I have to say, right? So yeah, this, to say, everybody is biased, is stupid. It's kind of meaningless, or at the very least not very meaningful. It's self-refuting. It's a fallacy. Uh, when talking about objective truth, obviously, it's kind of like neutrality fallacy, I guess, in a way. People saying, "Oh, well, I'm neutral, right? Because I'm objective." My opinion is objective and neutral, right? It's just a bunch of nonsense, right? Um, the only way you could be neutral is to not get involved at all, right? But as soon as you get involved in an argument, well, there goes your neutrality out the fucking window, right? You just got involved. Anyway, I hope that makes sense. I hope I didn't make any mistakes in presenting my argument here, and I hope you will go check out my Odyssey channel, because as incorrigible as I am, and I encourage all of you to be the same, who knows how much longer YouTube is going to tolerate me, right? Right. And that's exactly the problem. Take care.